The jelly bean is colorful, but its beginnings are a bit of a gray area. No one is sure exactly when the jelly bean was invented or how. It's believed that the jelly center dates back to biblical times and a candy called Turkish delight. Many centuries later, the outer shell was added, and the jelly bean was on its way to sweet success. The jelly bean is a sugary sensation. Billions are sold at Easter alone. To make jelly beans, they heat liquid sugar in a big kettle to about 175 degrees Celsius. They add glucose, which is a more concentrated sugar, and then starch. An agitating device mixes it all together. While elsewhere in the factory, starch spills out of a drum onto big trays. A leveler moves back and forth to even out the starch on the trays. The trays then move forward, and a brush knocks off the excess starch. It will be recycled. A molding board now presses down into the starch. It makes 756 jelly bean impressions in the starch in each tray. The impressions in the starch will serve as molds for the jelly bean centers. Nozzles inject the sugar and starch mix cooked in the kettle into the starch molds. This system can make almost 1 million jelly bean centers an hour. Next, the conveyor belt takes the jelly bean centers to the drying room, where they stay for 24 hours. This solidifies them. They become chewier. Arms flip the trays of dried candy centers and starch and dump them into a big drum that will separate them. When the trays flip back, they're refilled with starch and the molding process begins again. Meanwhile, the dried jelly bean centers, now separated from the starch, tumble out of the drum onto a wire mesh conveyor system. It transports them to a steam belt which dampens them. This readies them for the next step, sugar coating. The jelly bean centers go into a sander drum that tosses them around, while nozzles spray them with sugar. In another part of the factory, liquid sugar flows out of a kettle into a tub. A worker adds blue food coloring to the syrup, and then he blends it in. This mix is called engrossing syrup. He adds the engrossing syrup, along with some flavoring, to the jelly bean centers as they tumble around in a tilted spinning pan. After they turn a very sticky blue, the worker dumps some sugar into the pan. This process is repeated 4 times in order to build up a coating around the gummy center. The next day, when the beans have hardened, they add hot syrup to the mix and toss the beans around again. This polishes the jelly beans. There's a lot of sweet stuff here. 124,000 jelly beans in each pan. Now he adds a little wax. And as the pan spins, the beans rub against each other, distributing the wax. This adds gloss to the polish. Then the pan stops spinning, and the jelly beans air dry for 24 hours to allow the glaze to set. It's the finishing touch. After 3.5 days, this big batch of jelly beans is ready. They move in a multicolored mass along a series of conveyors. They fall into a scale system that portions them out for specific bag sizes. Then a trapdoor opens and they drop down a chute to the packaging department. Once they're in the bag, the jelly beans are ready to sweeten your day. Jawbreakers, also known as gobstoppers, have preoccupied candy lovers for decades. You pop one in and slowly suck or chew through up to 10 layers of colors and flavors. Sometimes there's bubble gum in the middle for an even longer lasting finish. The larger ones are just for show. Most jawbreakers are about the size of a golf ball. To make their bubblegum centers, a worker blends synthetic rubber with powdered resin, which will dissolve the rubber. He adds a thickener, a preservative, and an oil called soya palm stearine, so the candy won't stick to your teeth. After mixing and steaming at 148 degrees Celsius for 4 hours, the batter pours into trays to cool. Sugar, coloring, and flavoring would deteriorate in the heat, so workers add those later. There's enough of this base to make gum centers for 450,000 small jawbreakers. After 24 hours, the batter's hard. Workers chop it up and blend it with corn syrup to make it softer and sweeter. They add 45 kilos of finished gum that didn't make it into jawbreakers before because it wasn't the right shape. Now they add natural and artificial flavors, which can include lemon, orange, strawberry, grape, and even tutti frutti. Then they add icing sugar. It makes the gum smoother to chew than regular sugar would. Workers dump the batch into an extruder that shapes 2 continuous streams of batter called rope. Another extruder divides each rope into 6 hollow tubes. The cavity inside will become pockets of air inside the gum centers. The next machine slices the tubes into 1 meter long segments. A mechanical arm pushes the segments into the channel of a forming machine. Steel rolls then slice through the tubes and shape them into balls. The balls range in diameter depending on the size of the jawbreakers being produced. Air blows through perforations in a cooling tunnel to cool and firm the centers. Then they fall onto another forming machine, which restores their round shape. Other jawbreakers have hard candy in the center. The machine that makes them works like the presses drug companies use to make pills. It feeds candy powder into dies, then applies up to 5 tons of force to compress the powder into a solid candy. Now for the rest of the jawbreaker. First, they dump the candy centers into what's called a coating pan. They add a hot mixture of water, corn syrup, and food coloring. Then dextrose, a type of powdered sugar. The pan rotates for 20 minutes as warm air dries the ingredients over the centers. The factory repeats this step 10 times for each layer. Talk about a sweet ordeal. Making a jawbreaker takes 4 days. Workers give this batch special treatment. They speckle these jawbreakers with different colors, giving them what this company calls the psychedelic look. After letting the candies dry for 24 hours, a worker adds pinches of powdered carnauba wax. This gives the jawbreakers a shiny finish. Sliced open, you can see these jawbreakers have 10 layers of flavors and sugar surrounding either hard candy or bubblegum cores. They measure 5.7 centimeters in diameter, as big as a billiard ball. And if you're counting calories, forget it. A jawbreaker is 90% sugar.